Hello, everybody. I believe I'm live now. I'm going to give it a sec for the systems to reflect that. Great. Hello. I'm now live. I'm going to wait just a moment until the hour to 4 p.m. Eastern here to fully begin. If anything is messed up about the Facebook interface, have mercy on it. I'm not used to doing Facebook Live, so we're giving it a try. I don't yet see comments, so if anyone actually is here, it would be nice to just say hello in the comments so I can know that that function is happening, and then we'll begin. It does say it's live and it's 4, so focus my bad self and do some teaching. We give acknowledgement and thanks to the ancestors. We give thanks to the spirits of this land here in Western North Carolina, traditional Cherokee lands. I give thanks to the other powers that support me in my life, and just ask that you help this teaching to be useful and connective. Thanks to the metals and the fire and the tech and all the ones who sacrifice so that we can have this kind of interaction as well. Sure. So, hi everybody. I'm going to talk hopefully not more than a half an hour or something like that for maybe 45 minutes of total time. And in that time, it's welcome to put a question in the chat, knowing that it could end up feeling overwhelming to me, but I'll try to engage some questions as well. And I want to speak a bit, the name of the talk is Animism, Conflict, and Cultural Change. So I want to say a little bit about how I'm processing what's happening in the world right now, and how I think that a relational animist framework can have a place in the larger conversation. Since I'm speaking into the internet machine, it's good to situate myself a little bit. I'm Daniel Foor. I'm of settler-colonialist ancestries to North America, specifically early English, German, and a little bit Northern Irish arrivals in. It's been at least 5 generations in every lineage, and I live now, as I said, in Western North Carolina. And I'm a doctor of psychology, a therapist, but also I'm a ritualist and initiated in West African Ifa, but mostly I'm eclectic, dirt worshipping, talks to dead people ritualist, and I'm focused a lot on teaching ritual basics in a accessible way, and training some others in how to help with the ancestral repairs that are needed. My approach to all of it is animist, which is a way of saying that living humans are just one kind of person in a much wider network or field of relationships. And those others include the ancestors, the mountains, the lakes and rivers, the animals, the plants, deities, spirits of place, the stars, you name it. And this is a view that is often, but not always, found in more intact indigenous cultures. And it's also a view that's found in many, many cultures that are not legally or technically indigenous, but nonetheless have connection to place, to land, and an intergenerational habit of acknowledging the ancestors and the spirits, and however any given culture frames that. It's also a set of core values that is present in all of our ancestries if we dig back far enough. And in that way, it's something that can be reactivated, it can be learned and applied in a way that isn't culturally rude and grabby and appropriative and problematic. So a lot of what I teach is how to take that value set of relationships and actually implement that in a way that's useful for the world. So that being the intent, or that being the case, okay, I cannot both look at the camera and look at my notes, so I'm going to wing it here. 1 second. Okay. Why does it matter for the fact that we're living through a global pandemic, and that we're also in a moment where centuries of racism and harm toward black and brown bodies, and not only, but also the United States, is getting more attention from people who were not otherwise already as engaged, which is both good and complicated and overdue and probably ultimately like good in the end, if it leads to systemic change especially, but nonetheless catalyzed by ongoing murder of people in the United States. And so things are lit. And the value set from animism that says that humans are just one kind of person suggests that, for one, all other humans are also full people, even if they're of different ancestries, different genders, religious identities, nationalities, socioeconomic class, abilities, etc. So there's an implicit affirmation of the humanity of all people, of all humans. It's kind of redundant, and that is not just a cool spiritual teaching. That means, may it be reflected in laws, actual practices, politics, culture, education, economics, etc. So there's that. And the value set also says that the other than humans are also people, and they also warrant not just emotional, relational care and consideration, but legal and political acknowledgement and inclusion, which is not the norm culturally in the United States. So this sets the conditions to look at things like the ongoing boundary violation that is the occupation of the Americas by people of settler-colonialist ancestries like myself, or the enslavement of generations of Africans and the genocide toward African people that's continued to play out in very harmful systems and behaviors toward black people especially, and indigenous people, of course. And the way that in our eating we don't tend to give not just a nod of thanks, but to have rituals of relatedness and etiquette with pig and corn and black bean and rice and all the different relations who are part of our kinship network, whose bodies we eat and who we often relate with in a factory farm, monocropped kind of way. So that level of etiquette is rare in modern industrialized cultures, and we suffer because of it. And it's actually not separable from shitty behavior toward other humans. It's all one and the same kind of mess. And we're born into it. I was born in suburban Ohio in the late 70s, and nobody was like, hey, welcome. You're in this kind of racist, colonialist, complicated, earth disconnected situation. Let us get you oriented. No, we're born into it. And that doesn't make me wrong or anybody else wrong to be born into it. Children don't come with those biases. And so what do you do? What do we do about it? That's a question I'm still living. My life is an attempt to engage in one way around that. And so I want to try to engage it a little with, I made 4 points, but I have to look back at my notes to see what they are. So thanks for your patience. Yeah, okay. The first two, we need to include, or there's a benefit to including the unseen, so to speak, the spirits, and the land, the other than humans, the elders whose bodies are nature, in our framing of culture. When we think of culture as just the earth, or just the human behavior, we've already replicated a very narrow colonialist lens of who gets standing, or whose story, whose voice gets included. We can do really awesome, critically necessary change work for human justice, and I am in full support of it. And I'm suggesting, and I know it's radical, it's a very unusual perspective where it's been lost. In places where it hasn't been lost, it's unusual to not have this perspective. But I'm suggesting that it should be normal for an elected official, politician or whatever, to relate with the ancestors, the local rivers, the wind, and the plants in their district as their constituents. And that we are profoundly accountable to the others, And their stories also need woven in to work for healing justice. The idea that there's social justice and earth justice, as if they're not the same thing, suggests that only humans are primary. And that is already colonialist fragmentation and damage. And there's no nature. There's no, I mean, there's an earth, but there's not a nature-human split. There's just a web of kinship and bodies that are more and less human in form. And so the one challenge that comes from grappling with the animist set of core values, whether or not they're anchored in a specific indigenous lineage or you're just looking at these cross-cultural values, is to start to think about culture and cultural change in a way that includes the other than humans and the spirits as a legitimate others and sources of culture and sources of accountability and relationship. As soon as we hold that frame, the appropriate talk about erasure and whose voices aren't being included expands a bit. We're like, damn, we're excluding a lot of voices, in fact. And so good challenges there. A second thing is when we take an ancestral frame and we say, okay, what are some cross-cultural ways that we can start to tiptoe back into this more relational paradigm? One is to recognize the ancestors, because everybody's got ancestors. Even noxiously, spiritually disconnected, conservative, like unapologetically racist, waspy white people got ancestors. Everybody's got ancestors. And we are, whether we like it or not their only face, but their face. And in that way, whoever you are, I know I'm talking into the internet machine, so what's up, people out there? It's a little awkward still for me, and I'm getting used to it. It's an interaction between me and my people, and you, the listener, and your people. It's always like that, whether or not we want to deal with the implications of it. And when I don't even want to invoke the images of the violence that's happening ongoing. I know it's ongoing. I feel like folks are so saturated with it, but let me say in a more general way that when white people with guns or in positions of power enact harm toward black and brown people, it is a harm is happening between individuals, and it's also additionally a reinforcing and a re-aggravation of centuries of harm. And when people of different backgrounds ancestrally, where there's been harm, really get it right and really just come with humility and right timing and right energy and connectivity and responsiveness to the spirits, it's not only an interaction between those individuals, it's a diplomatic stitch of repair between the lineages that each person represents. And so we are inevitably representing our people for good or for ill. And it means that if you want to go beyond the intellectual engagement with ancestors as a cool idea and something you should probably do, or whatever it means to do that, into an embodied, ritual, direct relationship with your people, yes, you inherit blessings and awesomeness from them. Even if your recent ones are kind of a hot mess and you need to do some ritual with them and help things out, go back to the older ones. There are other places where I talk about that. That's the main thing I teach. But beyond that, if you're drawn to engage, yes, access the blessings. It also means that it's our moral obligation to take on the unpaid debts of our people. We should do that. We should even feel excited about it, even though it might feel like we inherited a giant mess. If you're scrambling for leverage and where to engage, I'm telling you that's one useful way to engage. It is not an excuse to bypass systemic change, legislative, legal change, overhaul of the systems, uprooting internalized racism, and doing all the other super relevant, articulated well in other places things. So still do all those things. And we're the face of our people. And the ancestors can change, the dead can change. Even the ones who are shits during life can change. And we can enjoy the communion with them in a more healthy state and enjoy their backing to participate in, it's not exactly paying off of the debt, but being responsive to the reality that we've inherited these they're unpaid debts, really. Specifically in this continent, to indigenous, native, First Nations peoples for thousands and thousands of years of stewardship of the land, and then the enduring of various kinds of hardships in the last 5 centuries from settlers and the bringing of enslaved people here, and the unpaid debts from the centuries of unpaid, non-consensual work from black people that built the country. And so it would be so good for the soul of those in North America, especially European ancestor people, to take that deeply structurally and spiritually to heart. And so animist values say generally that we're deeply embedded in a web of relationships. So that includes our ancestors. The ancestral piece is key to the cultural healing and the changes that are needed. So I see it that way. And then a third thing, so I want to make these four points, and then we'll see if there are questions. If you have questions, it's fine to send them in on the chat. A third thing is that Americans, at least, or people from the U.S., I know it chaps some people in Latin America for U.S. citizens to be like, we're the Americans. So people in the U.S., that's the only people I can really give a properly hard time to as a U.S. citizen, tend to be just fucking terrible at conflict. And it pains me. I'm still learning myself, so I don't mean to be righteous about it, but I don't know. I don't want to just indulgently grumble about the United States, and it is a generalization, but what I mean is that commonly folks will quickly polarize into anyone that's disagreeing with me is going to get, it's going to become personalized, and they need dehumanized or depersonified in some way. And there's a fragility beneath it. It shows up certainly in the form of white fragility, but it's not only that. It can be with men or cisgendered people. It can be with people who have money, or people who are just really nationalistic, or people who are engage in Christian exceptionalism, or whatever it might be. This view that if people don't see something the same way as you, there's not a lot of space to still stay open-hearted and connective and disagree about a thing. And it relates to the current moment in the sense that there's a really encouraging and exciting, to me, movement. It's not a new movement, so I'm not suggesting it's new, to defund the police. I think there are a ton of really practical reasons that redirecting resources to community-led and especially minority-led or disadvantaged communities, programs that actually serve the needs of people and put the local people in those communities in charge of what they need. It seems so much better in so many ways, and it tends to work wherever it's tried. And there are very good resources, especially from Black, Indigenous people of color, on those things, so check them out if you're interested. But this movement to move resources away from cops only lights up a lot of fear for people who haven't encountered that idea before. And that's understandable, but it's also really telling. And what I believe would need to happen for that to be as effective as it could be is for the culture around conflict to shift a bit, and for us to see the sacredness and the beauty and the benefits of conflict, and to learn how to navigate low to medium-sized conflicts in a way that doesn't mean calling the cops, especially if there's no cops to call, or that's only in a truly acute emergency. What are you going to do? You might need to know how to deal with activation of your nervous system, strong feelings, a feeling of fear, real or imagined, in a situation, and to know how to de-escalate, to know how to assess for safety, to know how to draw on resources, and to navigate things that are scary. Animism as a value set can have a place in this larger dialogue of getting good at conflict, because animists, generally speaking, give a lot of attention to the killing that is required to eat and to live. Because as soon as you say everybody's alive, the trees are alive, everything is relational potentially and potentially responsive, and we're in this web of kinship with others. But wait, isn't eating then cannibalism? Aren't I killing my family members and eating their bodies? Yes, we do that every day. I'm doing that, we do that. And you do that too, even if you're vegan. And we are heterotrophs, which means you eat the bodies of others. We are not photosynthesizing creatures, and even some plants eat animals, curious as they are. And we can do that more or less consciously, but it's structural. We take life. And generally, people who are trying to maintain etiquette and diplomacy, not just between one group of ancestors and another, or one community and the next, but also between the humans and the other than humans, will do things ritually and otherwise to bring conscious this ongoing exchange of bodies that happens just so we can eat. A lot of rituals in traditional cultures are based around either the seasons and the harvest or the movement of animals, and so the food, the beings that we're eating. And the rituals are, in a lot of ways, keeping that process conscious. Be like, hey, we're going to come eat your bodies now because we need to live, but we see you, we love you. I'm going to kill you now, but I'm going to keep my heart open and keep making eye contact while I kill you. That's not something we're very good at. I'm not talking about killing other humans, but I'm talking about the tension of just disagreeing, and the tension of having of bringing to attention the harms that are happening, and being able to just hold presence with that. That is a skill. Different traditions are good at different things, generally speaking, as a student of world religion. I know it's a generalization, and every tradition is a whole system, but I tend to see, for example, Buddhists as being above average good at dying. So there's a lot of attention on that and cultivation of awareness during life. Animists tend to be good at conflict and navigating conflict, because there's a training of how to effect a perspectival shift, to engage your mirror neurons and to understand where the other person's coming from. And from that, ideally, to cultivate some empathy, although empathy, you can also be a sociopath and know where the other person's coming from and not be empathic. But usually, if you can understand another person, it tends to encourage empathy. And from that place, you can be more diplomatic. You can be more respectful and polite and attentive in how you show up, and maintain some semblance of relational balance when we're beings that do a lot of killing to live. So the change is hopefully we're going to take the moment with the pandemic, however long it plays out for, to really make some big kinds of changes and resets that are needed. And our ability to lean hard into conflict, overdue conflict that needs center stage, hopefully that we can do a good job with that and not have to objectify or dehumanize others as a result. One resource on this thread that is good to just name is Sarah Schulman's work, Conflict is Not Abuse. And she goes to some effort to distinguish between normative or sort of regular conflict that doesn't involve someone being fundamentally threatened or abused, and abuse, which calls for a different kind of approach. So the last thing I want to name, and then hopefully some questions come in. It's okay if not, but folks are welcome to add a question, is animist traditions generally, or as a value set, if you take it to heart, tends to appreciate how hazardous some things are in spirit form, and how the world is not inherently safe. It's not inherently unsafe, it's just complicated. And most beings, human and otherwise, seen and unseen, don't care about us. Some of them are actively friendly and helpful, and some are actively malicious and harmful and dangerous. You can love them. That love can look a lot of ways. You can try to heart chakra them into a transformation, or you can love them with a boundary, or you can try to avoid them, or there are many ways that love can look. I'm not suggesting that we should act as if they don't exist, or delegitimize them, or depersonify them, as I was speaking to in the previous point. But the challenge is to recognize that traditions that live from a stance of interconnectedness and place-oriented culture, generally speaking, also recognize that there's some really hazardous shit in the universe, and some of it can kill you. And just because you're spiritual doesn't mean you're automatically protected from it. To the contrary, you might pull more heat because you're aware of some of that stuff. And that's people who are living any kind of marginalized or oppressed existence, generally speaking, tend to already get that. They don't need the, young American white guy on the internet to be like, hey, there's danger in the world. And there's a lot of folks in spiritual circles who, will tend to have a view that just love and kindness will be enough. And it's great. I'm a fan of love and kindness, absolutely. And the waters are deep, the trouble is deep. And the things that we're trying to transform, the slow-moving intergenerational accretion of ancestral consciousness that are the systems, the bureaucracies, the laws, the politics, the unjust, the criminal justice system, the prison system, these institutions that really profoundly need changed. Because when they aren't changed, they just replicate the harm. They replicate it in our culture, in our psyches, in our relationships. So keep focus on the systems and overhauling them, please. And so when we look at these systems and we're like, that needs to change, indeed. And I'm saying the system that we're seeing, which is its own kind of person, or like ghost structure, is just the visible form of a thing that has deep roots in the unseen. And that gets back to the first point, that culture isn't just human and it isn't just what's visible. So yes, we need more just laws and culture and practices to support those laws, and a movement away from needing laws, and just like healthy culture and self-responsible local taking care of life. And if we just try to change the outer form, there's a risk that we could miss some important pieces and be less effective in our change work. So what I'm suggesting, and it's not new, it's not original to me, it's not like something I came up with, is that it's useful, strategically useful, to get really healed up with your ancestors. Go deep with the spirits. Really find your connection to the earth and the land and the gods, and however that needs to look for you. Find an authentic, non-appropriative and not awkward way in. Go deep there. And from that place, when you're doing your specific destiny, your engagement in change work is likely to be more effective. That we can hold both. There's a lot of people who are holding both. The people that I most often personally tend to see model it are First Nations, Native, Indigenous leaders, elders around the world. But it's not just them. There's a lot of people who are holding both. Both the reality that what we can see is only part of the picture. That doesn't mean there are invisible reptiles driving the government of the world. There might be, but I don't think it's kind of weird and conspiracy minded to think of it that way. And so you hold the fact that there's a much bigger portion of what's going on that's in the unseen, and yet the outer form needs to change. The actual structures and laws need to shift. But ritual, tapping in with your ancestors and working the unseen aspect of stuff supports that. It's a both and kind of thing. In that sense, and that's probably the last thing I'll say, and then we'll have a space if there's questions, and it's fine if not. This is a big generalization, but for folks who are doing like systemic change work, activism, all that, it can be useful to bring in the spirit component also. Also for the intent of longevity and for continuing to be resourced by your ancestors, for the people that came before you and can back you if you're not already consciously bringing them in. And for the people that are mostly focused there, it's good to get a bit more practical and a bit more frontline about it if you can. And that can look so many ways. You might not have the circumstances to go to a protest because of the pandemic or your family or your body or whatever it is. And so there are a lot of ways that are articulated very well in other places to participate in changing the systems. Don't lose sight of the systems. Ibram Kendi's work has been really impactful for me in how to think about things in that way. And it's not my specialization to know how to talk about race and racism like in a professional way necessarily, but one thing I have taken to heart from Kendi's great work, Stamped from the Beginning, How to Be an Antiracist, is the importance of how the systems and the structures will shape attitudes. And so looking only at education and only at love and only at changing attitudes, important as it is incomplete as a strategy for change work, because we really profoundly need to keep target on the change of the systems that tend to generate the attitudes in the first place. And so what's beneath, what's keeping those systems energized? What's preventing them from changing? There's a lot of things, and sometimes they are changing slowly, but there's a lot of ghosts up in the mix too. There's a lot of troubled, unresolved dead that are still they're underwriting the structures as they exist now. So that's the angle for the larger conversation that I feel I'm able to bring. And if this kind of stuff is of interest to you, I do teach on it off of Facebook as well through online courses. One's wrapping up just now, and there are 3 that are starting in late June and early July. The one that's starting quite soon is Practical Animism, which gets into a lot of the stuff we're talking about here, about relating with the other than humans. And then in early July, there'll be Ancestral Lineage Healing, focus on work with your own specific dead people and how to help them out and how to get more deeply connected with their support. And then there'll be a summer series called Kindling the Need Fire, where we meet once a week for 90 minutes for ritual teachings and experiential work. So if anyone has questions, you're welcome to type them in the chat. I don't see any right now, which is fine. And based on that, I think we'll finish up. Let me just take a breath and make sure that's true. Yeah, the main thing, the only other thing I would add is it's tricky for one in this moment. It's trickier even than it was a few weeks ago to know how to speak publicly to the moment because people are in such different places with it. So for the people like that have already been doing the work for a long time, it's like, oh my God, like I love you and I wish it were changing quicker and I'm with you and I'm in it too and pooh. And for and it's been my practice to try to really not collapse and to stay very hopeful isn't the word exactly, but it's like holding the vision of the good outcome. And for people who are spending a lot of time trolling other people on the internet, oh my God, you're stressing everybody, like right the fuck out. So ease up on that if you could. And for the people that are just new to change work and realizing that it needs to land at another level for you, and typically speaking in this moment to white people, welcome, come on in and settle in. Don't be afraid to be a little messy about it. It's better to be involved and to be a little messy than to be too scared to get involved. And just let it rock your heart for a while and then figure out how to help. It's messy, and it's not just about one thing. It's not only about race or class or gender or all of it. We get born into a really messy situation. It's a cultural disaster, really, that sometimes feels more like quiet in the background and sometimes feels more immediate and fatal. I see a question from Rasa. I hope I'm saying your name right. Do I have thoughts on the upliftment of women of color, Black, Indigenous practitioners, people of color practitioners who've been doing this work for a long time, who are being discounted and silenced with our offerings, with derailments from the concrete material conditions that need to change? Being silenced with our offerings, silenced with our offerings, with derailments from the... I'm not sure if I fully understand the very last part of the ask, and I don't have a way to put you on audio, but the question is important. So, who are being discounted and silenced with our offerings by people derailing from the... I think, if I'm understanding you right, people not wanting to look at the concrete material physical conditions that need to change, that needs to stay foreground, yes, and how to uplift BIPOC practitioners. I'm not sure what exactly to say on it, but besides yes, that, and chime in if I'm not speaking to the heart of what you're asking. In my own, my focus personally is on training others in ancestral healing work, and the current group of folks is around half Black, Indigenous people of color. So I'm excited for those individuals to be able to bring their gifts and skills into the world. So I'm, in my own way, seeking to participate in that upliftment, although it happens gradually at the speed at which a training can play out. And in my role as a teacher, I have a responsibility to make a lot of space for different people and different styles. And that means that for some people's destiny, it might be very much coming hard and fiercely at the systems themselves that need overhauled. And for other people's destiny, it might be working at a different aspect of the overall shifts that are needed. And so I sometimes am slow to say something like everybody ought to whatever in terms of dictating a style or a form. I've had in my role, because I'm training others, to step back from that, because it is my job to make space for a lot of different kinds of destinies and different kinds of people as much as I can. And when you or anyone has a choice to find a similar offering from a Black, Indigenous person of color, try to do that if you can. It's a way of a modest way of correcting the unequal distribution of wealth and the backlog of harm. So making it tangible to support practitioners, absolutely. Yeah, those are a few thoughts. I wish we had a way in this setting to do interactive voice, but feel free to chime in again in the chat if I'm misunderstanding something you're asking. Thank you. And then I see one other question from Yolanda in South Africa. The question is about rituals in Vodun and justice versus revenge. Yeah. Ritual technologies, insofar as they're rooted in relationship to a large degree, are value neutral. Relationships can also be harmful. You can plot harm with others who act in harmful ways. So I don't see ritual as inherently rooted in love and wisdom and kindness, although I'm a big fan of those things. And there are a lot of terrains where it's not very cut and dry which side that's on. I know that a lot of people in at least American spiritual circles are uncomfortable with ritual or magic to harm others. And I think of, for example, I think it's in Chibok is the name of the place in northeast Nigeria, the women and young girls that were kidnapped by Boko Haram. There were traditionalists, at least in Yoruba land, who were doing a ritual, like hunter society folks who were doing ritual to make some stuff happen and bring consequence for those who had kidnapped the young women. Now, is that problematic? I don't see it as problematic personally. It seems pretty cut and dry that you shouldn't kidnap others, and especially when the outer systems of justice are failing. People will, especially in those moments, take to other measures to enact justice. And in a lot of cultures, the equivalent of the police and the ritual elders, they're the same people. They're the enforcement branch of the sacred. And those groups have different names and different ways of organizing depending on the culture, but part of their responsibility at times is to send people home early, meaning to kill them if they've warranted that kind of expedited return to the ancestors. It's not a kind of ritual that I'm interested in personally carrying out, but I respect it and I understand that there's a place for it. And usually it isn't on Facebook. Like, if that's really what it comes to and really what you need to do, make sure it's what you need to do and be ready to accept all the consequences of it. I think people sometimes dabble in that, and that can get a little messy. But yeah, let me say just that much. It's a nuanced topic, and when people enact ritual, like, there's no separation between ritual and not ritual. When, to use a dramatic example, in World War II, when the U.S. intervenes to try to check the spread of Nazi Germany, that's a killing Nazis ritual. You can say it's not a ritual, but it's a attempt to kill a certain number of humans strategically to bring about an end to a certain really harmful pattern. And war is not often ritualized as consciously as it often historically was, but nonetheless is its own kind of sacred undertaking when it's really, really needed. May we eliminate the conditions that call for it. So, killing, again, we circle back to killing and how to do that only as much as is needed, and to do it consciously, and to face the implications of it when it happens. I will close out, but even in talking about that, it's really charged and fraught terrain. And my point is that we need to be having discussions like this, because these things are happening anyways. And they're happening without a lot of framework for how to navigate it. And the more we can bring it conscious, the better likelihood of good outcomes. Okay, so I saw 2 good last questions. I'm going to hang out for just another minute. One from Liza. Any thoughts about medicine for white Euro-descended folks who are being performative right now out of feeling appropriate guilt and shame about inherited debts to Black, Indigenous people of color? Like, the guilt and shame load is of many generational size, and a lot of it's unconsciously held. Any entry-level suggestions for white folks to help each other not jump into performative bypassing around Black Lives Matter? Oh, well, listen to what the Black leaders are saying about what to do. That's the short version. If you're trying to do the right thing, you're kind of still worrying about yourself rather than keeping the focus on the systems. If you're really worried about having the right impact, it's still kind of self-centering. And and yet we need to include and have a space for our own messy, convoluted, guilty, shame-ridden, tangled up feelings, or else we won't stick with it if there's not a space that includes kindness for everything. So one general strategy is to allow for different kinds of spaces. When you're in a space with other white people where it's like, let us be messy, awkward as fuck white people who are trying to do the right thing, that's probably wholesome to a degree, provided you hold a good space for it. And then when there's people of color who would rather not spend even more time exhaustively holding space for you, unless you happen to be paying them well and they wish to do that, then that's different. Then it's important to reel it in a bit and to stay focused on attunement and relational care and centering of Black, Indigenous people of color for a minute, or a year or 100 years to start with. And so be attentive to what the space is, and that not all spaces are going to meet the need. I mean, Facebook is a disaster. It's a fucking disaster to try to navigate that level of nuance and complexity. So, nonetheless, be as non-messy as you can be while still engaging, is what I'd say. Don't allow the just sandstorm of performative and corrective and what do I do, what do I not do. Don't allow it to prevent engagement. I would say that feels important to me. And otherwise, listen to what the Black leaders are saying about how to be less annoying and more helpful. There's a lot of super good suggestions on that. And about the shame and guilt, work that shit out with the ancestors. I got a program for that. It doesn't even matter if you like me. I don't like work with somebody else if you don't like what I'm saying. There's people who are taking what I'm doing and copying it or doing it in their own way, and so work with them if you need to. It doesn't matter to me. But find a way to actually get the ancestors healed up. Because a lot of that guilt and shame, it's the ghosts eating your brain and moving through you. And that can be transformed. Guilt and shame, it might be useful to get you in the door, But beyond that, it's still white centering. It's like, I'm a loser, white person. Okay, it's still white centering. It's not actually that helpful. So work it out with the ancestors, because they're often like, can we work this out? We're sorry, we showed up really badly. And so they want to work it out too, usually. So you make a space for that. Good. Thanks. There's the last question from Yolanda, then we'll finish. While working with and asking for the well ancestors to help bring down energetic oppressive systems, what's the difference? I think I understand. You're contrasting the engagement. You can work with the super helpful, loving, kind, connective powers to bring wrath and fury and destruction on systems that need destruction. Some expressions of love include burning shit to the ground. And so that fierceness and love are compatible. Mostly, I would advise getting really tapped into the intergenerational elder wisdom of the ancestors and the land and the earth and the living elders who can bring that kind of energy, and listening in with them around the question of, what's my role here? I want to show up in a way that's useful for the change and is also congruent with my specific destiny. Not just like, not only what I read yesterday on Facebook about how I should show up as a white person or as a whatever person and follow those guidelines, which are usually probably good guidelines, but also very specifically, what's my medicine, what's my role, what's my particular angle that I'm supposed to be bringing. You listen to the ancestors on that, and they'll typically help you to know how to bring whatever that specific thing is. And it's usually going to be the thing that's also most useful. So we don't all have the same medicine or the same thing to bring. As soon as you start thinking everybody needs to X, you're probably replicating some weird colonialist, humanity flattening thing that says everybody needs to be the same. That's not the world we want to live in. Nobody wants that. So, yeah, everybody's got their own angle on it. Just do a really badass, loving, humble version of you and let everybody else do them and stay focused on what you're here to do. So when you die, the ancestors are like, how'd that go? Did you take care of some stuff? You'll be able to say, I did. We were talking about it. Like, why you need to ask? I was in conversation with you the whole time. Good to see you again. So it's not a big like, oh my God, I wasted my life. That you're letting them guide you in the present. That helps. I think it's good. So let's wrap it up. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and check out the courses if you want. I meant to add that one of them has a total pay it forward option, and the other two have scholarships down to a very modest contribution. And so we have set we put the settings at pandemic rates with the courses. Of course, if you're in a position to pay the full amount and you want to do that, that helps. We have a staff of 5 people, that each of whom have families and all that. And we are also very committed to keeping the work accessible to everybody who wants to engage it. So thanks. And thanks to the ancestors and the spirits and everybody who tuned in. I appreciate you all. Take care.